Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you to discuss this, we think, vital topic, and picking up from my colleague John this morning, the impact that conversational AI is having in our world and the ability it has to influence great patient outcomes and improve professionals' experience in the world of medical technology. My name is James Poulter. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Vixen Labs, and we're an AI consultancy based in London, working with global Fortune 500 and FTSE 500 brands to help them implement voice and conversational AI. Now, this is all about conversation, and it might be worthwhile us having a few. So I want you to take just 10 seconds and turn to one of your neighbors beside you and ask them, where was the first place you ever traveled for work? Just do that now, quickly. Where was the first place you ever traveled for work? There's hopefully a few kind of good examples coming out of there. The first place I ever got to travel to for work was I was working for an advertising agency called 𝐂𝐸𝐲𝐬𝐬. You might know of them from David Ogilvy, who was the founder there. And we got invited by our clients to go to Paris from London for a couple of days working with this big consulting client. And these folks had kind of turned the tables on that usual client and agency dynamic. Usually we're the ones in the agency putting on all the nice dinners and inviting people out and doing the schmoozing is the, I think, correct British word for this. But they turned it on its head, and they invited us out to come to Paris and spend a couple of days with them. And they put us up in this beautiful hotel on the Chateau de Lafayette, which is just up the hill from the Arc de Triomphe. And they invited us to spend some time with them. And the client, his name actually was Francois, invited us to come out in the evening on his boat for some drinks. If you want a picture of who Francois looks like, imagine somewhere between a kind of French bulldog and a kind of linebacker of a major NFL team, and blended together and about 5 foot high, and that's the picture you need. And Francois invited us out onto his boat that evening to spend a little bit of time with him and have a kind of couple of conversations, and we were greeted by a number of his staff coming onto this boat by these lovely little purple picnic boxes. Within they were contained, proper cutlery, salt and pepper shakers, and about 6 cases of Chateau Petrus. So we were, having a good time. And it was now time to head off down the Seine on the boat. And so the deckhands, which were previously the servers of the evening's meal, started unlashing the boat down one side. And Francois looks up and turns around, and in an accent that I'm not going to do because I'll get cancelled, says, "We go," and throws down the hammer on the boat, and out we cruise into the Seine. And it's seconds later that I begin to hear this machine-like crunching and splintering of wood bursting down the side of the boat. And I turn to my side and I see metal shards flying into the river and pieces of wood breaking off the side of the boat next to us. And what transpired was that the deckhands had unlashed us from the moor on the right-hand side of the boat, but on the left, we were still attached to the boat next to us. And another French man arrived out of his boat and started screaming all forms of bloody murder in a language that I now cannot repeat. And all Francois said was, "Don't worry, we will deal with it tomorrow." And he threw down the hammer, and off we went into the night. And I have no idea what happened next. "We will deal with it tomorrow," he said. Isn't that how we often treat when these kind of big rumor mills of technology begin to kind of get going in our industries? First it was the web, then it was cloud and social and mobile, and now we have AI as being one of the big frontiers alongside blockchain and NFTs and all of these new things that we constantly have to keep ahead of. And there's a temptation, much like in the early days of the pandemic, to go, "Yeah, don't worry, we'll deal with it tomorrow." But I'm here to tell you this morning that we cannot just deal with it tomorrow, because this is actually for us and for our clinicians, for our patients, and for those that come in and out of our hospitals and surgeries every day. It's their reality. They're dealing with it today. These devices, smart speakers, have popularized the use of voice technology and conversational AI into the homes of millions around the world. In around about most of the countries that we study in, the UK, the US, and Germany, over 50 to 60% of people already have a smart speaker device in a household. That's huge population growth, but it's not just in smart speakers, it's everywhere else. In our mobile phones, in the head units of our cars, in retail kiosks, and in screens wherever we might interact with them. The ability for us to talk to technology and have it talk back to us in a way that we understand it is everywhere, and it's no longer something that we can ignore. Just to kind of give a couple of different frames of reference here, we're talking about conversational AI in the broader sense. For many of us, that might mean the little lady that's in the box in the corner called Alexa or Google Assistant, Siri or Bixby, and those are your traditional voice assistants. But this technology cuts across all sorts of categories, chatbots, voice AI, and increasingly what we'll know as multimodal devices, those that have screens, but we still talk to them and predominantly get audio forms of feedback. And as John referenced in the keynote this morning, this is everywhere, and for many people, it's every day. From this year's Voice Consumer Index study, which we commissioned, we see that in all three of these markets, pushing up to nearly a third of people are using voice multiple times a day, but when you throw in those that use it daily, it's nearly 50% in these populations using some form of voice technology daily, and for many at least multiple times a week. So this is already everywhere for everyone, and we continue to see, particularly in the third-party space, three big players, Alexa, Siri, and Google Assistant are dominant in this space. So when we look at the way that that cuts down, here in Europe, Alexa has very much won the battle for our homes. We see that in the UK in particular, nearly half of all smart speaker usage in homes is Alexa, followed by Siri and Google Assistant on a very white screen. You can just about see those white bars. But we see that what these percentages are indicating is that we are used to having these devices in our homes, aren't we? How many of you have a smart speaker device in your home, just by show of hands already? In this audience, it doesn't surprise me that it's over about half of you. These things have come to live with us, and we've just kind of got on living with them. But I think that there may be a change in the weather coming around the way in which we speak to and discuss with this language. When I was first started my career, I started as a radio broadcaster, and I had the opportunity to present the news on a small station in northeast London. I was midway through presenting this, where I was about to throw to my correspondent, Ahmed, who was somewhere in North London reporting about something typically British, probably some donkey sanctuary or something. And in that report, all of a sudden, I was reading the news that was in front of me on this screen, and the bottom half of my screen went blank. Someone had deleted the script. And in it, they started replacing it with new script as I was reading, so pacing became quite an important point at this point. I didn't want to run out of words. And the story that began to emerge on the bottom half of the screen is that Ahmed was no longer going to pet some donkeys. He was going to be reporting on the fact that a tornado had ripped through northeast London and destroyed 6 homes. Now, I know that I don't think we get many tornadoes here in Malta. The government minister may be able to clarify that for me later. But certainly in London, this isn't something that happens all that often. And so this became a rather big story, and off he went to report on it. Now, I've been interrupted by tornadoes a few times because of this in my travels. But what I feel is that there is a tornado of sorts coming through our industry in this world of conversational AI. Tornadoes are created, for those of you that want the geography lesson, by two things: hot air coming up from the ground and cold air sinking down, creating a kind of vortex. So what are the forces that are at play here? Well, the first is the sinking forces. The thing that's sinking is mistrust. You could also say that that's rising trust, but that doesn't work for my analogy. So mistrust is sinking. What I mean by that is that we are beginning to trust these devices being in our homes and essentially, yes, listening to us most of the time, more than we ever have. We've done this study now for 3 years, and we've tracked that trust that mistrust going down, that trust going up for several years now in all of these markets. And the other thing is novelty is wearing off. Most of us have just got used to having these things in our pockets, in our cars, in our living rooms, kitchens, and wherever else. The history, we think, of the internet, if you want to put it simply, is the exchange of utility for privacy. You want utility, you give up some privacy. You want to hold on to privacy, and it's kind of hard to make things work well. But what we see in all three of these markets that we've been surveying is that when we look forward, people are wanting to use voice more than ever before. For some, a lot more, a little bit more, or about the same. But we have come to accept this thing is going to be in our life. And this usage across these markets is still growing. How much, you might ask? Well, it's growing about 43% more. We're expecting customers are expecting to use voice 43% more than ever before. So as that novelty comes down and that mistrust that's previously existed begins to dissipate, what are the things that are heating things up? Well, we see two big trends that are coming in the world of voice and conversational AI. The first is ambient computing, and the second is synthetic media. Ambient computing basically meaning that these devices will be everywhere in more cases than ever before. For those of you at the back, this may be a little bit small, but what might surprise you is when we look at where people most use their voice when they're talking to a device, it's actually on their smartphone at home. Yes, that means that most people are just wandering around their house with their phone and talking to it. Now, we know that this has actually been driven quite significantly by COVID and lockdowns, that people just started using their phone to do a lot more around the home and get things done. But what we've learned significantly since 2021 into 2022 is that those habits and routines that we built up during lockdowns and during COVID have begun to spill out into our everyday lives as we've opened up society. And so we now see big increases in all of these categories, bar the top two. We've seen 9 to 10% jumps in people using voice in the office, in the car, out at work, while shopping, in cafes and restaurants, and particularly when using headphones, which is driving a big use of voice when we're out in the built environment. And so you can begin to see what implications this might have. When younger consumers, particularly as we look at Gen Z entering both into the workforce and also having to take care of their own healthcare, will they expect to always talk to a real person, to a real doctor? Will they expect to be able to do some form of triage or pre-diagnosis with some kind of bot or AI? And will they expect that when they walk in and see one of your lovely little kiosks that sat in the hospital waiting room or in a doctor's office, where they might have to type their name in to check in, will they not just expect to be able to just say that name and understand and log them in and not have to worry about smearing germs over a screen? These are the expectations that we expect. And we know that across the board, usage of voice from our own studies from 21 to 22 is up by 7% in all categories. So this continues to grow, and it's something we have to pay attention to now. One of the biggest things that we all do with these devices is search for information. When you strip out using it for music or podcasts and radio, we see that the biggest thing that people do is they use their voice to ask questions. And when we ask people on different categories of questions that they ask, 51% of voice users already search for healthcare advice with their voice. And that cuts across a number of different examples. The first is searching for symptoms. I have this symptom, what's going on with me? Why is my heart rate this? What's this on my foot? It's not a personal issue, by the way, this is an example. So these are the first things that people do. Secondarily, people then go looking for treatments. Now, this can both be an amazing opportunity and also highly dangerous. People beginning to self-certify, beginning to self-diagnose. So when people then want to go on beyond that, they need to find services. How do I make sure that we have, in particular in the UK, less people showing up at primary care services and more showing up at acute services that are more appropriate to them? And when they find those services, how do we make sure they actually show up for appointments? Make sure that they show up at the right time and that they've come with the right pre-medication or other information that they need. These are the opportunities that are immediately in front of us, not in the future, but now. Half of people who have these devices, which for many of you have already said that's you, are already doing this every single day and every single week. Now, of course, as this whole technology scales, one of the big problems, and as we see from more and more countries around the world trying to deal with the volume and influx of people taking care of their own medical health, as we've already heard, is how do we actually scale beyond the doctor that's sat in the waiting room, or the nurse that's trying to help, or the receptionist that's on the front desk? How do we begin to copy ourselves and make our ability to scale into new platforms, not just in telemedicine, but also into places like the metaverse, which I'll come to in a moment. One of the most exciting areas of this I mentioned is synthetic media. The ability that we now have that through less than 30 minutes of audio of any one of you in this room, I can clone your voice. I can create an AI model that sounds like you, and crucially not just sounds like you, but can speak languages that you don't speak. We heard the health minister this morning talking about the fact that he speaks, a little bit of French or a little bit of German or what have you. I could, in half an hour, clone his voice and have him speak German fluently, powered by AI. And I want to give you an example. This is from a media example, but you'll see the point of how this is currently working. So I'm going to click this button, but if not, we might need help from the back to roll this video. The example you'll be able to download from the QR code that's coming at the end of this. What we now have the ability to do is to clone these voices to a level of fidelity where in the next few years, you might pick up the phone to your doctor and not know if it's your doctor that you're talking to. It might be the AI receptionist of your doctor. It might be the bot version of you. But think about the opportunity that this presents for taking content that we have in medical contexts far beyond the language barriers and constraints of the language it was written in, let alone the accessibility options for those with visual impairment. We already know from our study this year from an edition that we called the Synthetic Media Edition, that many users are already willing, this is what this data shows, the willingness to use synthetic media in these different use cases, from helping me make a purchase, which we can broadly apply to all forms of different medical purchases, to searching for information, for interactive experiences, and then, of course, for entertainment. And when we look at the opportunities that this presents, well, it means that there are many new places where previously we might have had a real person doing this job, where potentially we could have an AI solution doing this job. Now, of course, this raises all sorts of interesting opportunities when it comes to the metaverse. How many of you in this room have heard of the metaverse? Yes. How many of you have been in the metaverse? Exactly. This is the year that we're going to speak about the metaverse. I don't think it's the year we're going to be doing much in the metaverse yet. But it is something that we have to be paying attention to because, as our previous speaker said, it's an inevitability that whether it's a little bit of time or a lot of time, we're going to be spending some amount of time in these virtual environments. Now, whether or not Mark Zuckerberg's idea of what this looks like, that one of the major benefits of the metaverse is we all now get legs, which is, I think an important thing to call out. Having to dress for the bottom half is something we've all had to get used to recently, isn't it, since we've come out of our homes. The metaverse presents so many opportunities for us for medical settings. Obviously for triage, but also for community help and support, for getting people into early experiences that can help them both manage their own health, whether that's playing Beat Saber in a headset, swiping around, or actually going in and seeing a virtual non-smoking clinic, for example, places where they can get access to this kind of healthcare. But whether that is going to be in a fully immersed virtual environment, or more likely in a semi-immersed augmented reality environment, there is opportunities galore for us to explore on how we are going to talk to these patients, talk to these doctors in this space. And it's being driven by a trend that you maybe don't think about that often. How many of you have got a pair of headphones like AirPods that can connect, that have got some kind of smart speaker kind of built into their headphones? AirPod owners in the room? Yeah, okay, about 50% of you. AirPods is a very interesting business right now. If AirPods was a company broken out from Apple on its own, it would be larger, sorry, it's quite small, larger than Adobe or NVIDIA on the stock market. Just AirPods on its own. Now, why is that important? What we currently have is millions of people walking around with little headphones in their ears, talking out loud to themselves, controlling an artificial assistant. And that is training us to get used to speaking to these devices out in the wild. If you want this future where some kind of AR glasses is going to work with some kind of medical overlay, perhaps direction information to your nearest clinic, perhaps reading you out your BPM, or whether or not you might be about to have a cardiac event, we need to get people used to talking to these devices out loud. Now, I'm going to target this specifically the gentleman in the room, because this was a trend of years gone by, who was an early adopter of the Bluetooth headset. And I don't mean the current generations of them, I mean the nice big spiky one with a blue little circle in it. How many of you owned one of these in the late 90s, early 2000s? Come on. Okay, the ones that aren't putting their hands up are lying about it, but that is the shame that's getting to them. Bluetooth guy was a guy, right? That was hard work back in those days. To be an early adopter of a technology like walking around talking to yourself on a Bluetooth headset, that was hard work. But we've gotten over these hurdles popularized by these little white earbuds. It's got to the level where it's popular. But if we want this future, and that's an open question, do we want this future? We need to get people used to talking to themselves out loud, and AirPods is one of the big things that's doing it. So where does this leave us? What does this future look like? Well, maybe the machines are coming to help. Or maybe the machines are coming. Help. Which is it? You've already heard a little bit from John and others that these new opportunities create many different ethical considerations about how we will deploy this technology. Quite frankly, if we in the next 10 years want to guarantee that we will solve things like the climate crisis, tackle things like diabetes and overeating and smoking cessation, and also fix our world economy, we need the public at large globally to trust that AI works. in their benefit, not just our benefit, not just the company's benefit or the big pharma's benefit, but their benefit. Because quite frankly, the speed that we're running down the track towards some of these major global issues will not be solved by human engineering alone. We need these big data sets, machine learning and artificial intelligence to help us get there. It is the issue of our time, and it's crucial that we wake up to it. So if we want them to be trusted, we have to be able to answer questions like this. This is an image that I created using a generative AI program called Midjourney. How many of you have heard of Midjourney or played around with Midjourney? A couple in the back. You might be familiar with models like GPT-3 or DALL-E that you might have seen creating kind of big artworks out of very small bits of reference data. This may not seem like it, but this is a conversational AI intelligence. I wrote the words, a fox wearing a trench coat, walking by the London Eye into Midjourney, and it produced this image in seconds. Now you might say, well, okay, great, that's fun. Who owns this? Who owns this image? Do I own it? Because I typed the words. Does Midjourney own it? Because it produced it. Well, it produced it based upon data that it gathered from the open internet. Who owns this? Questions of ownership, bias, privacy, rights, and black box algorithms, these are the questions that will shape whether or not consumers trust in AI in the future. And this is fine if it's just creating a nice picture of a fox walking by a river. But when it starts to make predictions about what the future healthcare benefits might be of a certain drug, or starts using population data studies, which we're already beginning to see, which model real populations rather than testing with real populations, then those types of outcomes begin to get potentially very helpful or potentially very dangerous. So whether or not we trust in this in the future is absolutely crucial. You've already heard from John this morning about the work that the Open Voice Network is doing as we seek to find a standard and a shared set of values that will represent what ethical deployment of AI looks like. I also refer you to some of the great work by the Institute for Ethical AI and Machine Learning, which comes out of the Oxford Brookes University in the UK, and the Institute for Ethical AI, which is an open source community. These types of organizations are trying to help us solve this problem, because if we do not, then heaven help us, we'll have a much bigger problem on our hands than just making sure that people stop vaping. We will have, not a world to vape in. We have some serious opportunities to solve, and I commend you to invest some time in it. This is a QR code. You've become all very familiar with these in recent years. For those of you that want to scan it, you may. This will give you a download link for the synthetic media edition of the Voice Consumer Index. It's completely free, and it will allow you to get a copy of that should you want it. But you could also come and find me afterwards to get a copy too. As we come into land here, I want to leave you with this challenge. When you think about getting better patient outcomes, when you think about creating new remedies, drugs, pharmaceuticals, or whatever other category, or developing new medical technology devices, are you thinking about the conversation that the user will have with it or about it? Are you thinking about the conversation that you could be having with patients to improve their outcomes? And are you thinking about the ethical implications of deploying these types of data models and technology? If you're not, come and get involved with what the OVN are working on. And if you would like help thinking about how you might leverage things like synthetic media or the use of conversational AI in applications, then we would love to talk to you at Vixen Labs. But thank you very much for your time. And if you have any further questions about the next version of what conversation looks like, you'll be able to find me in the break wearing exactly this outfit somewhere back there. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.